All right, we're at Kilroy's workshop today, and we're sitting down and we're just to talk about all things career. So we're sitting here in May of 2024. Every May this rolls around where you've got graduates from high school who are looking for jobs and they're wondering about career choices. Leading in advance of that, you've got the same type of questions from parents coming in too, just wondering, okay, where are my kids headed? What does it mean? Like, we're a welding school, we do blacksmithing, we do all the kinds of trades as well. What does that mean to get into a career like that? Trades versus college, apprenticeship versus trade school, so many different ways to go. So I thought we would just take some of that stuff head on. So first thing I'm going to actually touch on is your resume, because I get this question a lot. I've seen a lot of resumes come through the door here. Ben, actually, when he first applied. So Ben, shop manager at Kilroy's, when he first came in, he handed me his resume and there was nothing on it related to trades, right? Nothing, not a single thing. But he had what we needed. He was solving a problem that we had. And that's the big thing actually for resumes. People look at resumes as, the purpose of a resume is, I want a job, right? But it's kind of missing the point. The employer needs to solve a problem, and you need to be that solution. That's really the point of a resume, is to show how you're going to solve that employer's problem. Now, you've got the stated problem of, like, if you're running a coffee shop, I need somebody to brew coffee and be nice to people.
Yep.
Right. The unstated problem is the employer is tired of getting a call at 6 o'clock in the morning because the person who is supposed to be responsible enough to set an alarm didn't get up in the morning, and they don't have the door open and customers are standing there waiting. That's the unstated problem. And so you can show that on a resume if you can find both the stated problem and the unstated problem, and right at the very top of the resume, give a little paragraph about how you are the solution for that problem. Everything else then is supporting that initial paragraph on there. And so when I lay out a resume, and my favorite style of resume is one-page bio of, I've got my, instead of objective up at the top, because that's my objective, I want to solve the problem of my employer. And I can change that from application to application very easily. Underneath that is support for how really I can actually solve that problem, right? My background and really how that relates to the statement that I made above. It's evidence. And then after that comes your chronological type of resume if you've got one. If you don't have any job experience, skip the chronological part. Just solve the problem and talk about all the different experiences that you have. Or if you're older like me and I've got a long chronological resume, nobody's going to read that, right? And if I'm putting down all of my experiences, related or not, it's a long resume. Nobody's going to care. Only really put down the things that matter to that employer on there. So,
and would that be part of the question of why should I come work for you as well?
Yep.
That employers ask?
Yeah, and so you can actually document anything in there, even if you don't include it in your final resume, you can actually trim that out of there and you can put on like a supporting cover letter, right? And so you can have another thing that's on there oftentimes is if you've got your chronological separate, you can put references available upon request.
Yeah.
That type of a thing. So you've thought about it, but you're not inundating them with stuff. If you're going after a large corporate job, your first job is to get past we'll call it the gatekeeper. They're looking at, here's the job description, here's the resume. I'm going to pass these off to the hiring manager. These go in the junk pile. And so that question, why do you want to come work here? You got to figure that out even before you put in the application. Yeah. If you don't have that answer, don't put it in the application, And that actually jumps into kind of a good follow-up question on that is, what job should you go after?
Yeah.
Right? So who does welding? Yeah, good chunk of you. All right. What do you think happens to most welders when they decide they want to go into welding? What choices or what questions do you think they initially ask?
Well, just based off of who comes here looking for work or wondering how to break into the welding space, it's really not clear, especially if you're not around the trades often, what path you're supposed to take. And the reality is there are many different paths that can all lead to the same destination. But what we like to tell people is if you're not a good welder, you will not get a welding job. Doesn't matter what cert, what degree, anything you have that you can flash in front of an employer Any welding company is going to say, cool, don't care, sit down and weld. And then they're going to judge you based off of that. If your welds look good and they're impressed, they'll go, hey, what certs do you have? What degrees do you have that might support us? Or if we've got specific processes that might help us, again, solving their issue. But for any welding, that's the first thing they're going to make sure is that you actually know how to weld.
What certifications are available for welding?
It's a great question, Brandon. I'm glad you asked that question. So certifications, plural, right? So people will come in here and they'll say, I want to be a certified welder. And they don't know what that means. It's not like being a doctor, and even doctors have specialists or specialties, right? With certified welding, there are certifications in the American Welding Society, specific processes within that you need to identify, and you have to recertify. Right? And so it's not like one and done. Like, I got a cert. Yay, I'm an expert. There are different certifications, and all it means is that you pass the test once. So whenever we have welding students come in here, I always tell them, great, it's a great goal to have to get a certification. But you have to know the path that you're going to go down for that certification to really matter. And my goal isn't to get you certified, it's to get you so good that every single weld you do would pass a certification test. Because if it doesn't, if you don't do that good of a job at welding, somebody's life is at stake in many cases, right? This is life and death. There is no such thing as a C in welding. I hate that schools exist that allow you to get a graduated grading scale on welding. It's pass or fail. Like, as the Princess Bride says, there's no mostly dead. And so with this, the goal is to get so good that every one of your welds pass, because they're going to have to. You get on a job site, you're a pipe welder, they're going to examine your welds constantly. And if you're not passing every single time, it means that somebody's life could be in danger and they will take you off the job. So while there are great paying jobs in welding, the goal again isn't to get certified. That's just a measure that goes along with it every time you actually weld. It gives you a standard to go based on. But every one of your welds can pass. Also, when you walk into a job, and like Ben said, you walk in there and you say, here's my resume and I've got a certification, they're going to be like, that's great, go weld. Yep. And they're going to take you out onto a rig that you're not comfortable with, that you've never seen before, to do a welding process that they do in-house. And you got to nail it with somebody watching you. In addition to that, you might even have that potential employer go, yeah, exactly why did you do it that way? And it could be totally correct. They want to see that you're confident in the reasons for the decisions that you've made. My son, Josh, went on a job site, and he went in there, applied for the job. They said, that's great, go weld. And they put him on a rig outside doing flux core overhead. And he goes, Dad, they were running that thing way too cold. Well, he had to have the confidence to actually change the settings that the welder on site had to crank that up, to nail the weld, and he got the job starting the next day.
Nice.
Right? But you got to have that level of confidence when you're working on this kind of stuff to know that you are such a good welder that you can walk into any situation and nail it. Or say, I don't know. So the worst thing you can do is go in there and fake it. Right? But I'd rather have you just get really good so that you know it when you walk in there. And that's ultimately the goal with welding, is to get so good, I got this. And that's really what it comes down to.
So if I'm wanting to get a job in welding, what exactly should I be aiming for in that?
So when getting a job in welding, there are so many different types of welding jobs available, so many different processes. Try them. Go, like we have classes here where you can do GMA or MIG. We can do stick welding. You can do TIG welding. You can do different processes to kind of learn what you gravitate toward, because most often you find one type of weld that you really prefer, whether it's super detail oriented, whether it's, you like doing structural, or you like being outside, or you like being inside. All that stuff goes to inform the type of welding that you end up doing. The other part of that is, what skills do you have? So when I've got somebody who's coming in here and they're just getting started in welding, and they come in for 6 weeks and they want to get that first job, I ask them what other skills they have, because if that's not the only skill. I've got a young man who came in here, and I took a look at his resume, and he was discounting everything up to that point. He was 30 years old. He had done a lot of stuff. But it was driving forklift. He was working as a CNA, certified nursing assistant, doing different things like that. And so he had discounted that in the trades. And I'm like, don't do that. I mean, being a CNA, he's got a lot of experience in working with people. Well, that's a huge skill. Leverage that, right? Because if you go into a welding environment where he's got to work with people, he's got that part down. There are a lot of people who are terrible at that. And so, but you recognize the skills for what they are. Even if you don't have any job experience, you've got things that you've done, hopefully, besides playing video games, leave that off your resume. Don't put that on. But you've got a lot of experience to lean into. So if you're into cars and you've been working with cars for a long time and you want to get into welding, get a job in auto and then add welding to the mix. And then you're going to be the welder at the place that you got hired at, you know. They might not be advertising for welder. Like Brightview Landscaping is across the street, huge company across the country. They've got people there who weld, but they wouldn't advertise a welding position as available. But utility companies, if it's between you and somebody else, all things being equal, and you can weld, you're going to save them $150 to $200 an hour because they can actually have you do some welding on there. They'd never advertise the position. But even if both of you are hired, who's the first one getting laid off? The non-welder, because they know that you're harder to replace. So you're adding to your skill set. And that's a great way to get in. They start giving you and feeding you work. And then all of a sudden you've got, 5 years of experience that are required, for a lot of jobs and getting into that. What you want to avoid, and, God bless people for having a bunch of jobs available for welders in kind of line welding, but it's a tedious one. And so getting those things where it's just part after part after part after part, doing the same process, you're not really extending. You're a robot. And that's where I tend to veer away. Also, we run our shop family friendly. We run our school that way. There are a lot of places that aren't, and it's not a healthy environment to be in, And so watch from a cultural perspective where you end up getting that job too. Aim for the place and the type of thing that you're doing, and then bring your skills up to match that.
So once you have a job welding, what's really important for climbing the ladder and moving up in your position?
So, and this goes for even beyond welding. When you get that job, show up 5 minutes early, leave 5 minutes late, and do what you're supposed to do when you're there. And you'll set yourself apart from 95% of the workforce. It's really that easy, doing that kind of a thing. And then ask questions. Do the things that you aren't asked to do that you see. Keep your eyes open. If there's a piece of trash on the floor, don't step over it on your way to your objective. Pick up the piece of trash and throw it away. Yeah, Kyrie.
Questions are good questions to ask.
Anything that's going to help, I mentioned before, you're there to solve a problem. You can ask those questions that are in the nature of solving those problems. Also come with potential solutions. That's the other part of that. So if you're constantly going to your boss and saying, yeah, but what about this? What about this? What about this? If you can come in there and say, hey, I noticed this. How about if we do this, right? Make this little tweak here, or I've got a solution for this. What do you think? That's a great way to go. On the same vein, like I've had people come to me and ask me for more hours. In our discussion about resumes and solving problems, does an employee's need for more hours solve any problem?
No.
No. So Ben was looking for some hours on a Saturday. What was it that you did that was like, I was like, wanted to, like, even if I had to manufacture a tear to my eye, it was so awesome. What did you do?
Well, a lot of a good revenue generator for us were emails that advertised classes that were upcoming, maybe advertised classes that weren't filled but were coming up, and so we needed to get them filled to make sure we earned maximum revenue off of that class. So I came to Ron and I offered, hey, I need to make some extra cash just for my wife and I, and if I work on Saturdays from home, I'd be able to design and advertise the emails to go out to our customer base to get those classes filled, which is revenue generating. And so, yes, the company would be paying me more to work that Saturday, but the caveat would be as long as those classes filled, and they did start doing that as I got those emails sent out, the revenue that we gained easily outweighed the revenue that was lost by paying me more time. So there was a net gain to me working more hours.
Yep. And just for the sake of numbers, if we're looking at, say you're making $20 an hour, that's your rate. That's not what you cost the company. Take it to 30, right? That's really the cost, because there are taxes, there are fees, there's insurance, there's all kinds of things as that overhead is there. Not only that, but every hour that you're working does not translate directly into revenue. So say 50% of your time is revenue based. Now double that. So you've got to actually average $60 during your working time per hour to break even, and no company is in it to break even, right? Because that doesn't keep the lights on. That doesn't pay for all of the equipment and things like that need to go into it as well. And it doesn't pay for other people who are non-revenue generating. That's the additional overhead in the business, right? Those admin, who answers the phone, things like that. And so what Ben did in tying his extra time to revenue that would more than outpace the cost was brilliant. And so instead of asking for more hours, say, I could make this change that will either offload something from the employer's plate, right, to make, in my case, my life easier, or Ben's life easier, or something go a little bit smoother, or generate revenue that would more than support the time involved, and then actually do it. That's the other part, execute. Otherwise, you're going to end up losing that time anyway. So don't go and just say, hey, I need some more hours. Say, hey, there's this problem. I think I can solve it. Here's how I'm going to solve it. I need this extra time for it. That's the way to approach something like that, and then actually do it. And if you do that, that's actually a slam dunk, just about. I mean, because every employer wants to give you more hours if it's going to translate into a greater, business for the company. Yeah. That's just a natural way. That's why we're in business, is doing that kind of thing, right? And so give that support, make it an easy decision for them. Okay.
I've got a question. Yeah. It's going to be, so what trades, like finding a job in the trades outside of welding, how do you look for a job in the trade industry? Because it's very difficult. Most kids, they get out of high school or they're on summer break and they go look at for hiring now signs and fast food jobs. How do they find trade jobs?
Okay. All right. So let me understand your question. So if, say you're coming out of high school or you're in high school and you want to go find a job in the trades, how do you break into it? All right. In a nutshell. One is I've got a video on networking. There's no better way to get a job than networking, because you're no longer cold calling a place. So if you just walk into a bunch of places and you don't have an existing skill, your existing skill is picking up stuff, right? That's the extent of it. But what you can do is go around and introduce yourself with no expectations of a job and ask questions about getting into the industry of that person. Tradespeople and just people in general are great about, if they've got a young person coming to them for advice, they'll give advice freely because they've seen the other side and they've been there, right? You do that and you come back and then you follow that up with, can I come and ask you some more questions as I'm building out my resume and as I'm trying to think through things, right? You've opened a door there and you've created an initial relationship without an ask, and then build that relationship. And you might just find that that's the place that you end up. But even if they don't have a job for you, they might be able to provide introductions to get you into that. So networking is huge. That video that I did was networking for introverts to some extent. I mean, I didn't call it that, but I am an introvert at heart. I'm not a shy introvert, but it's a learned skill. And so it's nerve-wracking going in. It's less nerve-wracking going and asking for advice than it is going and asking for a job, especially if it's cold, right? The other thing that you can ask and get a sampling of, some kids grow up in families where trades are common. My dad was a shop teacher, right? I spent every day after school in shop just about for a good chunk of my life. And I worked in it actually as an apprentice when I was young. But a lot of people don't have that exposure to it. So if you're growing up in a household, like, I mean, Ben didn't have exposure to it, right? He had a friend of his actually put in his resume. It was a warm handoff. But get to know some of the trades that are out there and see what you might like, so you don't get, do all that networking in and get a job in an area where you just despise it. Like, if you don't like getting dirty, don't go to a car place. That's not the thing to do. If you don't like being hot, don't become a blacksmith, right? There's certain things that you can just tell on its face. The other thing is you can actually learn an awful lot on YouTube about different types of trades and see what kind of you gravitate toward and do that. A quick note for parents. Trades are legit. For every 5 people who retire out of welding, for example, and I'm just going to use welding as the example, but it's across the trades. For every 5 people who retire, there are only 2 people to take their place right now. Sorry, but AI is not taking welding jobs anytime soon, right? I mean, there's robotic stuff and things like that, but then there's operators to go along with that. You got designers and stuff like that. Trades are a place that actually it's ripe for young people to come into it. And there's been a bit of a boost, but there's a whole lot of room yet on there. So much opportunity for jumping into the trades. And so for parents taking a look at this and seeing where their kids want to go, if you're unsure about the type of career that you want to get into, and you have this conversation with your folks, talk to them about trying some different things. Because if you graduate from high school, even if you're in high school and you try a career and you don't like it, you can still go back to college. That's not gone. But if you don't know what to go for, you're just kind of wasting some money. And you're wasting, even more importantly, time. Time you don't get back. And so make those wise decisions and have that conversation with your parents to say, okay, I can go get a job over here. I can earn some money for college, but I'm also saving up. The other thing is the trade skills are life skills. Even a PhD needs to know which end of the hammer pounds in a nail, right? Even somebody with a master's degree, or they're an engineer or something like that, they might need to hire a roofer.
Yeah.
And if you know how to do that and what's important in that, you can do those interviews and, hire the right people instead of the wrong people. A quick story, when I actually graduated from college, I got my degree in finance. And so I'm not against college by any stretch. I'm just against a wasted time in college. And nowadays it's actually easier to get into trades than it's ever been. But when I first moved here to Colorado Springs, I didn't have many tools. I had a 1988 fuel-injected Acura Integra. And it was running rough. I was in an apartment, no tooling, nothing. And so I took it into a auto repair place. And they came out with an estimate that was like $900 in repairs. This was back then. I mean, we're talking like 96 time frame, before any of you were around, or most of you. I think, yeah. So before any of you were around. And they came out with this estimate. And in the middle of it, it said carburetor. There's a problem. There was no carburetor on the car, right? But if I didn't know that, I'm signing off on it. Well, I'm like, I slid it across the table and I said, show me where the carburetor is in my car and then we'll talk. And it was up, I was out the door. And I went out there, I found that a spark plug wire had come loose from a casing. It had burned through. So it was misfiring on a spark plug wire. And guess what wasn't on the estimate? New spark plug wires. With that simple fix, it was done. But if I didn't know that, I could have been taken advantage of right then and there.
Yeah.
And so even understanding that, when you're talking to your folks about getting some of these jobs, these are life skills. Lean into that big time. Yeah.
So someday becoming self-employed, just working for yourself, how do you see that going, and what are the basic keys to those doors?
I'm going to first start by talking about business versus self-employed. If you are the tradesperson and you're going out there, say you're a welder, and you're doing the welding, you're independent, you don't have anybody else that you're working for, you're still working for the customers, obviously, but you got your own name on the sign and everything else. Consider yourself self-employed. When that transfers or translates into a business, then it's more like you got staff who can do it. You can sell it someday. If you're sick on a day, stuff is still getting done. That's really where it turns into a business. So first think about it in those terms. There is nothing wrong with being self-employed. If you love the task, stay self-employed. If you want to start a business that you can someday sell, Think of it in those terms. You might start off as self-employed and then add people over time. That's what we did with Kilroy's. I taught for the first 5 years solo in here. But as we added staff, it morphed into a business that can function even when I'm not present. And so that's the first thing. Work for somebody else for a while, because then you get to see how a business is done, because there are all kinds of different things that you never really think of when you're going into business. Like if you're going into business as a welder or as an electrician, you got the task, but you've got a lot of overhead that goes along with that. You got to land the contracts. You've got to do these negotiations. You're putting out bids that don't get accepted. That type of stuff happens all the time. And so by working for somebody else, you can get a front row of that. And you're going to, as a person who wants to be self-employed, you're going to be watching for things differently than another employee might, who doesn't want to start their own business. You're going to be paying attention to how the business runs. And then feel free to ask to take on some of those responsibilities, because you can learn through that process too. It's a mentorship. For sure. And if you're working for a good place, they're going to be like, yeah, because they want you to move forward in that, right? First, you're actually taking a load off of the employer or the managers or whatever. But in doing that, you're also moving forward, and that's always a good thing. And so learn those types of things too. As far as, the state that you're in and the type of business that you're in, there are all kinds of regulatory licensing things and stuff like that too. So you can check those items off. If you need to be certified, get the correct certifications in whatever it is that you're doing. If sometimes a couple of years is required, an experience. Like if you wanted to be a certified welding inspector, you have to do the task for 5 years.
Yeah.
So you can look to do something like that. And so lay it out, but be purposeful about it. Make a plan and sit down and actually execute on that plan and give yourself some goals and deadlines. Otherwise, if I set out a plan for 5 years out, 5 years is going to come regardless of whether I plan for it or not.
Yeah.
So make it purposeful, right? You can work really, really hard. We're in Colorado Springs right now. If I made it a goal to get to Denver, but I didn't really have that as a stated goal in advance, and I was just going to start walking in any direction, I might end up in Pueblo. I worked just as hard as going to Denver, but I was aiming in the wrong direction. So aim in the right direction. Stephen Covey in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People talked about, you've got a ladder that you've climbed. You climb the ladder of success and you get to the top only to find out it's leaning against the wrong building. Don't do that, right? Be purposeful about it. Make a plan, set goals. Goals, at least if you don't achieve the goals, you did that with intention. You made other choices, and you can move and pivot and stuff like that as you go.
And that would come to like preventing wasted time, right?
Oh, yes. Yep, because like I said, 5 years from now comes regardless of whether you plan for it or not. So be purposeful about it. One of the questions I ask young people in here is, where do you see yourself when you're 30? I just had this conversation with a guy the other day, and he had an answer, right? He thought about it before. That's good. We should think about that, because 30 will come regardless of whether you want it to or not. When I teach high schoolers, I talk about from 15 to 25 years old. A lot of you are in that range right now, right? Most of you, actually, all of y'all are in that range. From 15 to 25, you will never make more life-altering decisions than you are right now.
Yeah.
You're setting your trajectory. And if you're sitting at home playing video games, like it or not, you're setting yourself up with a trajectory, because you're not doing things to further things along unless you're going to be a professional gamer. And you got your Twitch account and you're creating a following, whatever it is. I just learned what Twitch was the other day. I figured I'd toss that in there,
Yeah.
But you're still doing that. You're just doing it poorly. It's without real purpose behind it.
Yeah.
So be purposeful about that, because that 15 to 25 time frame, a lot of you are going to meet your future spouse in that period of time. You're going to make decisions about your education, your career choices. Not that that can't change later, but it's still setting a huge path in front of you that you're following for right now. And, there are very few times in your life where it's as critical as it is during this period of time. So not to put too much pressure on y'all.
Oh, gee,
but
thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in my first year of college. What do you think about the kind of difference in value and where it can put you going into the trades versus going to school for, right? I'm going to school for engineering or something similar that might work closely with the trades.
Yep. Perfect. Are you going to a school that specializes or has a specialty in engineering? Okay.
A&M is known as an engineering school.
So Texas A&M, and so that's one of the keys there. If you're going into engineering, if you're going to be an engineer, you need the degree to go with it, right? For the most part, unless you're going to be self-employed and you've got a specific thing that you're making or you're doing, you can actually learn a lot of that on your own. I've known some great engineers who never went and got formalized education. To some extent, that ship has sailed. You don't see that very often anymore. And if you're going to go get a job in industry, you'll need that kind of credential for sure. What you don't want to do is go to a school who does engineering, right? They're a nursing school and they do some engineering on top of it or something like that. So it's good that you targeted that. That's awesome. I worked at a company where we had engineers there. Like it was tons of engineers. And then I worked on the shop floor and we would make the parts that they designed. One of the brilliant things that this company did is for 2 months out of the year, the engineers had to come out of the cellar because it was down in the basement, so a windowless environment. They had to come out of there and actually work the shop floor, making the product that they designed. They had to actually execute it. I would love it if, with my vehicle, if the engineers who designed it actually had to go and work in auto repair on the vehicles that they designed. I think they would make some changes, right? And so from a trades perspective, like for engineers in particular, definitely get some involvement in the trades, in the type of industries that you're in. So if you're going to be an aerospace, what is it, aerospace?
That's the goal.
Okay, aerospace engineering. If you're going to be in aerospace engineering and you hate all things aerospace, that's probably not the field for you, right? If you hate being at a computer, look at civil engineering, that type of thing. But actually get a job in the environment that you're going to be in, even if it's not in engineering, for two reasons. One, it makes you a better student because you'll understand and you'll ask the right questions of your instructors when you're there. The other is you're making connections at all levels of a company. So if you're going and working for like Hammers Construction, doing construction, and you're going to school for engineering, you can actually then use that afterwards as a point of reference and maybe a job. Because you've established that credibility. The other thing is, even if you're not going to work for that employer, you've got stuff that's still related to your engineering. Like, you doing design work now, when you're not in school, you go back and you're more informed because you've seen it in action. You can use that on your resume, again, solving an employer's job, their problem on the resume. You got that laid into your resume, baked in there, that you solve these problems using engineering concepts, and they're going to look more favorable on you versus another graduate. Yeah.
Is it possible to spread yourself out too thin when trying to become a jack of all trades?
It's a good question. So the jack of all trades thing, first of all, let me hit that. You've all heard jack of all trades and master of none.
Yep.
Do you know the rest of the phrase?
No.
A jack of all trades and master of none is oftentimes better than a master of one. And so it is possible to spread yourself pretty thin going across trying to do too many things too fast. But getting a cross-section of skills is really, really important because it makes you uniquely you. He can go off and get an engineering degree. You can go do welding, that type of thing. But if you've got other skills to lean into, when a unique problem comes up, you're going to be able to provide a unique solution to that problem. I think about things in a way differently than other people because of my mixed background. I did computer science, my degree's finance. I've done just about every trade there is, teacher, public speaker, writer, all that kind of stuff goes into the mix. Now, when somebody brings me a problem, I've got that to lean on, not just one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've got nothing against a PhD. I've got a good chunk of my family who have PhDs. But if they're well-balanced and they're doing other things, that makes their education worth more because they've got other skills to lean into that feed into that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a big thing. So good. Love it. Open it up. Any other questions?
Going back to asking questions with just in general at a job, right?
Yep.
Would you say that employers always prefer that, like you said, instead of faking it, right? And it doesn't really matter on the question.
Yep.
Because then that would show that you're willing to learn. Is that correct?
Right. So most employers love it when you're leaning into it and you're asking those questions. It means you're engaged in the job itself. And it's going to make you better also than in a leadership position because you will have asked the right questions And so you can give the right answers later on, right? And you're going to be that kind of engaging person. So one of the things we always say here in the shop, you all have heard it. Anybody who comes in the shop has heard it. We make metal things in here, but our product is people and community. And part of that comes into asking questions and engaging with people. And so even if the question seems like it's benign on its surface, it might lead to deeper discussions later on, or it might open a door for somebody else to ask that question too. So you just asked that question now, it might have prompted one of you all to think about things in a different way, right? It might alter something because you spoke up. And that's one of the values of actually raising your hand and asking those questions. Now, don't be like that, I've got questions, because that does get annoying too, right? And so you don't want to be the person who's always like tapping somebody on the shoulder because you got everything, like everything becomes a question. But ask the good questions, and it'll help everybody else around you too know that this is a safe environment to ask, because you're not the only one getting that answer.
Yeah.
Everybody got that answer. And so that's one of the values of asking those questions. So good question.
Thank you. Instead of also just asking all the questions, typically I've found that it's better to learn just by watching everything, like paying close attention. Would that set you apart from other people in the workplace who, let's say, go out and just hang out, right? Or just look at their phone, Instagram, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is that a great way to learn? Just watch everything?
Observation. YouTube has proof of that. That you can learn through observation and observing other people. Nothing replaces actually doing the task, but sometimes the observation will get you invited to doing the task as well. And so, is it easier for me if I'm actually actively working on something to ask you, if you're observing it, to lend a hand because you're there and you're paying attention? Or the next time I do it, you want to give this a shot? We actually have an employee at Kilroy's, Gabe, he was a young kid, and I was doing a setup for theater set, because we do theater set construction here. And he was probably 14 years old, had just turned 14 maybe even, and he was watching me do the setup. And he came over and he literally sat down and was watching me as I was using a nail gun. I was doing some other setup stuff. I asked him if he wanted to come over and give it a shot. Well, he's working here now. That curiosity and that observation showed interest instead of ambivalence. So that's really important. So good question.
This is kind of a callback, but for resumes, you mentioned finding a problem for an employer and then solving that problem.
Right.
How is someone who's used to being the employee look for an employer's problem in a business they're maybe not familiar with or on the outside of? How do you go about looking for a problem and solving it?
So don't write your resume in a vacuum. Ask for other input as well, because other people do know that business. You can look at online reviews, because sometimes that actually shows that there's a problem that needs solving, and that's going to be top of mind for them. It might come up just even in conversation, because there's nothing wrong with calling the company to ask for clarification about a position too.
Yeah.
Right? You might get somebody who's in HR and they're like, if it's a big company and they're like, I don't know, but then no harm, right? You might also call up and get the owner on the phone if it's a small enough business, and they're going to be like, well, this is specifically the issue that I'm running into. Can you solve that? You're hired. Because now you've gone ahead and actually pushed for that. So the other part of that too is, if you find a place that you want to get into and they don't have a position posted, still reach out. Because if you can identify a problem that they have not posted yet, because they don't even know where to look to solve that, you might just see that just in a course of doing business with them. But do your research. Too many people just cast out hundreds of resumes all over the place, and they're the identical resume, and they're surprised that they don't get a call back. Well, do some work. I mean, people go for 4-year degrees, right? I mean, engineering degree right here. He's paying for a 4-year engineering degree to go get a job. And yet we're afraid to do an hour's worth of work on research before going in for an interview. Well, which one is it? I mean, you want the job to come easy, but yet, you got people who are willing to dedicate years of their lives and tens of thousands of dollars for a degree to do the exact same thing, to prepare them for a job. And then they get out of school. And you see this with college graduates all the time. They were expecting this job to be waiting for them when they're done. That's not how it works. right? Your work isn't done because you're done with your parties, whatever. Not that you're partying all the time. I would never say that to your parents. That's not what I'm implying. I haven't heard anything. But you want to lean into that a little bit and say, I'm willing to do some of that work ahead of time to build yourself to a position where you can solve that problem. If you see something going on in a place that you want to work at, just ask yourself, what are you willing to do to get yourself in a position to solve that? Like, it might mean some self-study. It might mean putting yourself out there, getting some practice on some things. We've got welding students who come in here and they're going ahead and they're sticking themselves into this situation for 6 weeks. We've got a 6-week program, but we've got also then year-long programs for some folks who want to come in here and do that. They're leaning into it, but don't let the training get in the way of actually identifying that problem and solving it. So, yeah, good.
Would that help develop a relationship with the employer? Because then you're willing to call them up and to talk to them, right?
It'll at least show that you're serious about it. This isn't like, I could go work for Chick-fil-A or I could go work for you. Not that Chick-fil-A is a bad job. There's a lot of people, well, you worked at Chick-fil-A for a while, right? And so it's a great training ground, but I'm just saying, you can go in there without prep.
Yeah.
If you want a career type job, it's going to require some prep. So I worked for Oracle for a while. For a long time, actually. And then I went out on my own and I wrote computer programming books. Weird stuff for a guy who's in the trades, but I mean, it's actually gone, again, jack of all trades, master of none is oftentimes better than a master of one. It actually kind of makes me who I am. When everybody else would go off to lunch, more often than not, the instructor stayed behind and brought a sack lunch. This is like for 10 weeks of training. I stayed. I didn't actually eat lunch. I worked in there to cement the things that we had gone through that day, but I had one-on-one access to these instructors who were, they were top in the world at what they did. My benefit. Yeah. It benefited my employer too, but I carried that with me. Yeah. I also made some great connections through that because the instructor loved seeing how engaged I was in that. And they were willing to give me way more in information because I cared. Right? What instructor or what employer doesn't want that? I showed and demonstrated that I cared about it, and then I was going to lean into that. And that actually set me apart in that. And to this day, I benefit from it. Yeah. I can still diagram for you up on a board something that I stayed behind and memorized while everybody else just kind of went on their way. I wrote it out over and over and over again on the whiteboard with the instructor present, asking about all these different facets of how this whole system worked. Yeah. Because I asked the right questions, but then I also leaned into it on my own time. And, I haven't worked for Oracle since 2002 or 2003 timeframe, sometime around there. But yet it continued benefiting me as I went independent and created my own, I was self-employed. Yeah. Doing different things. And that benefited me far longer than it did even the company. Yeah. Right? But anyway,
So kind of a follow-up on my previous question. So say you're just a high schooler and you're going to get a summer job, you're going to go work fast food. Probably one of the most important things to show on your resume there is that you're just a reliable employee because it's fast food. Anyone can do that. Yep. How do you, on your resume, show that you're reliable? You show up on time, you stay late, and you're just overall a dependable employee.
One, if you can say, I am punctual, I will show up for 5 minutes early, I will leave 5 minutes late, and you're going to see me do what I'm supposed to do when I'm here, and all the things that we've been talking about here. The fact that you're recognizing that needs to be said is going to be a plus when you go into that employer. The other thing that you can do is get a letter of recommendation from somebody who's not mom and dad. So say if you've done a volunteer job, you've done it at church or you've done it at school or whatever, or you've even just worked for some neighbors doing some ad hoc things. Get a brief letter of recommendation and tell them that you want to highlight how punctual you were and how hard of a worker you were and stuff like that. As a secondary addendum, your letter of recommendation on there, because you don't have necessarily a work track record to show. But if you got a character reference, we hire character first in here, heart of a teacher second, technical third because I can train technical. character and heart of a teacher, which is very important in a school, are two things that are really, really hard to do. So that's the order in which we go. A character reference goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the reasons that, we typically just promote from our student body because we know each other, right? It makes an easy transition into that. But yeah, that letter of recommendation goes a long way, but then also just being able to articulate that's a problem that you see in the workforce, not to hammer anybody else, but just to say, okay, I understand that this is probably a problem. So, yep. And actually that kind of brings up to just another thought on work itself. Not every job has to be career. There were times I mowed the lawn. I had no intention of doing that. I just needed some extra cash. There was still a problem that needed to be solved. And so I wasn't looking at that as a career move, but I wanted the job. It allowed me to do some things, I could kind of zone out because I'm literally just following a line in the grass, I could zone out and be thinking about other things as I was doing that, focusing still on the great job. But when you're just driving straight, it gives you a lot of time to process, mental downtime. It was what I needed at that time. And so sometimes jobs are just jobs, but you're still solving that person's problem. So to land that job, you still have to go through the same exercise or thought process. So good. So this is a huge thing that we're talking about today. We just scratched the surface on questions that you might have. So I would love it if you would actually add anything to the comments down here. Do you have any questions about getting started in the trades, about getting jobs, about resumes, things like that? I'm an employer. I've been an employee. I've been on all sides of this. I've been self-employed. I've run a business. I'd love to hear your comments, and go ahead and toss any questions you've got down in the comments block, and we will be happy to address any of those that pop up. We might even make a video or two out of it, and you never know. But good luck on your job hunt. Really dig into it. Work with your parents if you're a young person. Work with people around you. Do that networking. Check out our video on networking, and we've got that on our YouTube channel. And can't wait to hear more about how your job hunt goes.